everyone. Welcome to Marvel Live. I'm Marcus Toe. Thank you for joining us. I'll be drawing Apocalypse today, I guess it looks like. I hope you guys like what I have to offer today. If you guys have if any of you have questions, please feel free to ask, and I'll try to respond as best as I can while I draw. So the people at Marvel Live got me to draw a layout as we before we got started to kind of help along, speed things up. As you know, us artists, can be a little bit slow sometimes when it comes to drawing things, and it's good to always have a layout handy. It allows us to get a lot of the thinking done before you actually get down to the finish line, and it's a nice basically everyone should be doing layouts and stuff when drawing, and it's good to kind of have underdrawing involved. I know some people don't do that, but if you're really confident, then go for it. But I'd say most of the time it's good to get stuff done this way. If you've seen some of my live draws before, I did one a few months ago of a X-Men pinup that I was messing around with, and I think I did a few other small pinups while I was on break, and I usually have some classical music in the background, but for this time it'll just be me. Perhaps I'll start singing for you guys, or not. I don't have a very good voice. Also, as you can see, I have a Pepe Larraz pinup for X of Swords as my reference layer. As I'm sure many of you know, Pepe Larraz and his work, which is phenomenal. He's a wonderful artist. I had a chance to hang out with him a little bit once in Chicago. He was very kind and generous, which was awesome. Always good. It's always nice to see people you revere as a creator be such good, nice people. So that's always a plus. Generally, I think that I find it very difficult to start kind of just cold drawing without a little bit of warm-up, which I probably should have done earlier today before the stream, but that's okay. Sometimes it's nice to practice and work on just see, when you're drawing, a lot of times it's really good to test yourself, not always think things through, just go with instinct, and then other times it's good to really sit down and hash out the problems. So, and at the moment I'm drawing these things digitally, and one of the good things about drawing digitally, and I'll kind of show you how things are going, is that you can have these rulers and utilize them to draw circles, because I know sometimes drawing circles by hand can be quite daunting, and I know there's templates and rulers in the real world that you can use as well. But I like these. I like these digital rulers. They're pretty sweet. They help make drawing circles a lot less of a problem. And you can copy and paste them if you need two of them, which is wonderful. Saves time too. And when you're an artist on a monthly book like Excalibur, it really helps for you to stay on schedule, and it's probably the most important thing in my opinion as a monthly artist, to be on time. That's what they're looking for. They need you to complete the task on time, and it's vitally important for fans as well. So you as fans know how frustrating it is when your book is not out when you want it to be. So know that a lot of us work very hard to make sure, editors and creators alike, make sure that the product is in your hands at the right times. I hope you all have been doing well recently. It's been kind of crazy these days, but know that we're working hard to put some fun in the books, and X of Swords is totally that. It's a lot of work goes into the creating of something as big as this, and the X-Men has been oh man, the stories in the X-Men has been phenomenal. Just I can't even imagine what goes on in planning something like this. I know I'm a part of it, but wow, it's just the backstories and the characters and utilizing their history, and it's just amazing what the X office has been brewing. And I hope you all like what everyone's been working so hard the last few months on. My contribution personally has been X of Swords Prelude with Excalibur, and in that story I think it came out recently, so I'm not going to spoil anything for anyone, but it's it will explain Apocalypse's role, and how one of the gates on Krakoa were formed with the Eternals. So it's pretty heavy stuff in my opinion. Hopefully you like the story. Hopefully you like the art, and if there's, I'd love to hear your thoughts over Twitter. So sometimes for going back to the drawing, sometimes for a figure, and if I have the layout already done, like I have right now, it has been a lot of times I like to kind of outline the silhouette a lot of times, because and this isn't always, but this helps with figuring out line weights, which helps give the figure more of a form. It's almost like the skin around the bones in the middle, and the meat, because the thing with inking is to help push volume, to help build character that separates from the background and other characters. It's It's a very important process in comics that really helps give life to the underdrawing that's there. I've been blessed with a lot of really solid artists in my life, from creators like Ray McCarthy, Lobo Underwood, Richard Zajac. I even had a chance to meet and become friends with a lot of these people, and I think that's the best thing about collaborating in comics is that you meet so many wonderful people that become friends, and you get to draw comics together, and that's always a really awesome thing to have the ability to do. And I know growing up, for me, I was one of the only people that liked comics and liked drawing, and it was a blessing to be able to have friends that you find to do and like the same thing. So I have a few questions. Who's my favorite character? It changes from time to time. I'll say I generally like a lot of the X-Men. Cyclops is one of my favorites. Spider-Man's a classic favorite. Colossus and Iceman, I like a lot of those guys. I'm a really big fan of Rogue, Gambit. Yeah, there's just so many. On Twitch, Brightblade also asked who is my favorite character, so that was thank you for that. And Davey Thomas 6, the artist Finn, do you have any tips for dynamic poses? Dynamic poses, generally the best way to learn is to draw from life, and I know that a lot of times dynamic poses in life aren't really readily available, and I think that just stems from understanding the human body, and that's why you need to learn to draw from life. Before you can contort and do things properly, you kind of have to do things, you have to learn the basics, and I know that sounds very bland and blah. It's the truth, and I would have saved myself a lot of years of heartache and bad reviews if I had studied earlier in my career better basics and shadow and stuff. So with dynamic posing specifically, though, again, the idea of first knowing the anatomy, but then also knowing the silhouette. And the silhouette is the basic shape around, like if you blacked out everything within the figure, you would still see an interesting shape. So the best way to kind of figure out, and if I was doing layouts at this stage, I could show y'all what I mean by that, because that's what you figure out in the layout stage is the pose and how you can see the silhouette of the character that you're drawing without all the extra detail, as people like to call it, because detail is just kind of like icing sugar. There's not really anything to it other than kind of giving the already dynamic figure the form, the little bit of toppings on the pizza or whatever, but the dough that it's under it was made already, and you can't really see it. So dynamic posing, try to think of silhouettes, try to think of your character without any detail. Is it still interesting to look at? And then that's the best place, in my opinion, to start figuring that out. On YouTube, Charles Petrie How much of it all, if at all, do you worry about drawing a character to look the same all the time, or is it second nature to you? I think it's important to have people look, at least have a level of consistency. I know that, and again, that's where you learn structure from, right? Because if you understand the structure of a body, a character, even when they look different, that's where your underdrawing will show and produce that consistency. I do understand that we all kind of have our own style, and people like to draw people a certain way, and I'm sometimes a slave to that myself, because when you're drawing things very fast, you tend to go with what you know, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But that just kind of goes to show, the more you know, the more you will be able to draw things on the fly, and look different, but also consistent to the character that you're drawing. So how if I was to break it down, it would be all about shapes. Every character has certain shapes that you can go back to all the time, and then you redraw it the same way, understanding the shapes of that person. So every figure, every body, every building, every tree is made out of shapes, and you use those commonalities to kind of break down the simplify it, to make sure that you can see things beyond just the eyes and ears. Animal Saturn 15 has a question: how do you plot your anatomy? This goes back to the shapes. You plot your anatomy a lot of times with breaking down the body in larger shapes. So the main shapes I always find is the torso, so the shoulders to the kind of the V shape that a lot of superheroes tend to have, is really key in a lot of it. So I start with the V shape of their chest to their kind of abdominal area, and then you have the pelvis, which is important as well, because a lot of times how your pose aligns is however the pelvis is rotated, or the angle of it. And then the legs is the next one. A lot of people start with the head, and a lot of times it's not to say that that's a bad thing, because sometimes the head's the funnest part, and you kind of start with that first, and I've done that before. But honestly, whenever you're figuring out anatomy, that's probably the last thing, because everything else of the body will kind of be there, and then the head kind of follows in a lot of ways, especially when you're planning out a page. It's one of the main problems that a lot of artists have, and we all go through these growing pains, is that you will start drawing, and you will find that, say, your character doesn't fit in the panel anymore, because you started drawing and all of a sudden their legs are incredibly short, because you're like, oops, forgot to didn't plan this out as well as you could have, and then you're just kind of last minute fitting the legs in. So that's why you start with the torso and then the pelvis and the legs, because then you break down the most important parts to fit into your drawing. Mark Bartle art. Is this Photoshop? No, I use Clip Studio. Um, I find that it's the most pure drawing tool. I know a lot of people use um, other programs, and we are all, creatures of habit. So I do understand that some people use different things, different programs for different things, and but this is just what I use, and I've really liked it so far. And I find that the rulers are worth the cost of admission alone. Let's just say that it's just, it has saved me and a lot of the tools involved in what this program does for comics. Helps again save time, organize yourself better, and all these things are super important to make sure that you stay on schedule. On YouTube, how do you make sure your focal point of your drawing stands out or draws in the attention of the viewers? A lot, it's a lot of planning. As I said before, and I'm gonna hammer this in constantly. It's layouts. You get your layout. If it stands out in a small, image with no detail, it'll stand out with the details. So the most important things are the shapes, and make sure that you can utilize the contrast to help push the viewer's eyes to where you want them to be. So as you can kind of see, I have a giant A in the back with a character in the middle, and then I have a rocks that I plan to have that kind of push the V inward. So if you look anywhere but, it'll have everything, other elements in the drawing pointing towards your focal point, which is the figure. And sometimes it's not the case of the figure, but it's as an artist, it's your job to force the viewer's eyes to look where you want them to look. So, and sometimes we don't always succeed in that, but I think that's the thing about art, is that you'll always have second chances to draw a better piece and learn from your mistakes from the previous one. So that's awesome, and the best thing about art is that you'll get better all the time. I'm getting a lot of, what is my favorite Marvel superhero and villain to draw, from Furious, Mahir, and Ritesh. Yeah, I said it before, as generally it changes a lot depending on my mood and what things have been coming out in movies and stuff. But Cyclops is always fun. Iceman, Spider-Man, Stegman's work on Venom really makes me want to draw Venom, that's for sure. And those guys over in the Spider office are doing a phenomenal job. Villains, I'm a big fan of Magneto. I really like how Magneto looks. I had a chance to draw Magneto when I did work on XMen Blue, which was awesome. I had a really great time with drawing that character. Captain Britain, Betsy Braddock in X of Swords will be great because, you know, like, she has her swords, and it's just fun to play around with these characters, and kind of adding these unique little elements to them, you know, makes it incredibly fun to draw. And you know, being part of the X office and part of X of Swords has been amazing, and it all that in itself allows me to draw and you know, draw all these characters, and but also draw new characters I never thought I would like to draw, because, like, as some of you have seen on my Instagram and Twitter, I've been liking drawing Pete Wisdom lately, and I hated him growing up with Excalibur. He was one of those jerk characters that when you read them, you kind of hated them, because in a lot of ways that's the conflict, you know, that's the conflict the writers a lot of times want to implement into their writing and into the story arc, so that, you know, they're not supposed to be liked, they're supposed to be hated. On YouTube, how do you convey emotion in your drawings? Now that's a tricky one to answer, but I do love doing that. I do love trying to draw those slow moments or those emotional moments, and draw into personal experiences, to help push the story forward, because, you know, as an artist, you want the audience to feel what the character feels, and as a creator, that's probably the most important job that we have, is that we convey and try to push for a certain level of empathy towards people. And if you can create that in your art, in your writing, that you've basically won. And it's hard to do that. It's a mix. How I try to convey it is, it's a mix of storytelling techniques, like panel layouts, the right kind of pacing in your story, and then facial expressions and body language, you know, like, I think a lot of us understand universally, no matter what language you speak, a certain level of empathy towards someone that has a certain facial expression, a body language that you can tell, and you can feed off of whatever they're feeling. And learning that and studying that is important for an artist and a creator to be able to recreate. And that's where we're talking about anatomy. That's where we're talking about facial expressions and silhouettes, and even dynamic posing goes into that. Dynamic posing of someone that is depressed and showing it physically is important to know how to convey as you draw. And that's the thing about comics, is that it's not just drawing superheroes punching and flying. It's about drawing people in vulnerable situations and earth-shattering emotional moments. And that's why we love the characters we love, because we can relate to the pain that they go to a lot of times. So Twitch, Davey Thomas 6. Marcus, if you could choose any superpower from this list, what would it be? Flight, speed, or super drawing hands? I already have super drawing hands, so it's no. I like the idea of flight. There's a certain level of freedom that if you were able to fly, I would imagine you'd have. And I think especially with, you know, sometimes you feel like you need to get away. I would imagine that flight would help give you that feeling. Not to mention, it'll cut down on a lot of flying, and so my family lives out in Vancouver and I live in Toronto, and it would have been nice to fly over there in this crazy time to see them. So Elisa on YouTube, have any tips on drawing torsos and hands specifically? I'll do something really quick on the side, and you can I'll erase it later. But how I draw hands and torsos is again, it's shapes. So you look at silhouettes of a hand, and then, as you can kind of see, it's mostly just shapes, or how I like to try to do it. Outwardly shapes, and you just start with those shapes because you can kind of look at your own hand and see those shapes kind of built up. Not to mention torsos. Torso would be, is mostly just like a rectangle or a triangle, right? And then you just fill in the gaps of those shapes. So you start with larger shapes and then break it down into other shapes as you go. One good exercise you can try is that next time you draw something like a body or a hand, you can draw nothing but the silhouette around it, and don't worry about anything in the middle, and just draw a bunch of that, and then it'll help you visualize it a little bit better, because one thing that and this might sound a little bit self-deprecating, but one of the things I found is that a lot of times people explain drawing a little bit harder because not everyone has the ability, and I know I wasn't one of these people, and I'm still not, that can just see something and then just break it down in their own head and draw it. I've always been the person that needed to understand the structure and break it down into, like, how you see people drawing hands with a bunch of tubes and stuff. So I did that for a long time, which helped a lot. But what took me to the next level was understanding silhouette, and that helped from a friend of mine, Coy Turnbull, who helped me when I was younger and explain silhouettes to me. And it took me years after that to kind of get comfortable with understanding what he meant by it. But it's the construction of the body, understanding where things bend, where things you fold and stuff, and that will help you. That should help anybody figure it out a little bit better before you draw it, and that takes time, sure, but and we all wish that we were the type that can just look at something and then it just makes sense, but not everyone's like that. So just understand how you learn, and how you can figure out and break it down in your own way, and basically a body, just like anything, is like a machine, and understanding the structure of it all, it'll make a big difference in your art. Irish and sketchy. Question: if you could only give one piece of advice to aspiring artists, what would it be? I'll give two because there be it's different for each person in a way that I've always asked when people come up to me at shows, where when it comes to comics or drawing or I'll always ask them, why do you want to draw? Do you want to, if you want to get into comics, or do you like just drawing? Because you can just like drawing and like doing your own thing, and not be in comics, and that's okay. Like it's awesome. To have a hobby on the side that you do for fun, and you can be as good or as bad, or as you take your time with it as much as possible. But know what you want to do with it, and you don't necessarily have to choose right away. But with each drawing and each thing that you do, you have to know what it's for. Sometimes it's for presentation, and you have to put more effort into it. And other times, it's just a sketchbook. Be kind on yourself when you learn. The drawing, sometimes the drawing is not for other people to see. That's for you to figure things out and break it down on your own time. Knowing what you're drawing for is important. So if you just want to keep it as a hobby, that's the kind of thing that I feel like is the best advice to give, is like, knowing what the drawing is for. Is it an understanding that it could be either like a learning thing, or it could be a something that you want to spend more time on. And sometimes there are stuff, finishing is important, but that's more important when you want it to be professional. And if you want to be a professional artist, again, like I said, it's about finishing. It's learn as much as you can, finish, and stay on time. Know your limits and work within them, and try to get beyond them at the pace that you feel comfortable with. And being an artist is wonderful and amazing, but it's also incredibly hard. I always try to say, you have to kind of take your ego out of it. You're a lot of time, you have, on one side it's great, you have a lot of people, if you're lucky, you have a lot of people loving your work and telling you how great you are, but there's sometimes just this equal amount of people that is willing to tell you are not good at all. So kind of taking your ego out of it and remembering why you're doing it, and loving what the actual process of drawing, and not what the result is. I know that sounds ridiculous, but the result is almost secondary. It's the moment that you're drawing, I find, is the most important. I try to enjoy doing the thing, and then what comes out of that will eventually translate. Because if you start, if your only purpose of drawing is to have other people tell you how good or how bad you are, it's not going to last very long, and you're not going to continue with it, because when that stuff disappears, then you will stop working as hard as you can. But if you just like doing it, then you'll be doing this forever. Yeah, being in comics is pretty tough, I'd say, but it's great at the same time. It has so many great things about it, and meeting the people that I've met is one of the main things that has kept me going. Is the community that you can build in this crazy industry. Fluffy Mako from Twitch asks, if I can give any tips on digital drawing and tricks, I'll say this right away. Here's the thing. It's you gotta not think of it like tips and tricks. Digital drawing is just like drawing in with pen and paper. It's a tool that you use to create a look, perhaps faster than the standard pen and paper. But it's the same aspect of getting better. You just have to draw, and study anatomy, and do all these things. Why of learning. For digital drawing, if you know how to draw with a pencil, you'll know how to draw digitally. It's the only difference is where the pencil is stored and what you can do with all the extras. But you don't need extras when you know how to draw. And the best tip I can give you is to learn how to draw traditionally. The only difference is that maybe the pen doesn't react the same way as it does digitally. Because as I'm drawing, so right now I'm using a tool called the G Pen on my program, and it reacts the same way as a true G Pen works. The only difference is that a real G Pen I would need to reload with ink, so that kills a lot of time. I would have to make sure to wait for the ink to dry before I jump onto another aspect of the drawing sometimes. All those things kind of kill productivity. I'd have to specifically angle my paper a certain way to get the line weights that I want, and I don't have to do that digitally. And those are the reasons why I start doing things digitally, not because it makes me a better artist. It just is the tool that allows me to do things without waiting, which for where I am right now in my career, that's kind of the biggest key, is to make sure that I can get these things done and out of my hair as fast as I can before my editors yell at me. So I've always said this: be aware of how you see things, and just try to make sure that you know that it's like, I'm not doing things digitally for the sake of cheating. I'm trying to do digitally for the sake of making sure that, and I've went years. I years of my career I was drawing pen and paper. Before this was wild, and before, when everyone was doing that, and before scanners were a thing and people needed the pages, we used to have to draw the pages and then get them approved, and then bust it to, say, like a DHL or a FedEx office, and then mail out the thing before 5 p.m. or if you missed that 5 p.m. cutoff, you'd have to drive to the airport to drop it off at the actual delivery, or the main delivery section of it, and it was just crazy scenes, and it would be like a race to make sure that you get it out on time and then shipped to the inker or to Marvel head offices, and it's crazy. I can't even think of it. I can't even think of doing that again. And all those things come from you're able to have digital files now, and it just saves a lot of time. Those few hours could be crucial into making your deadline, and we don't have to do that anymore. And I look at the same way as doing drawing digitally. It's just another tool to allow you to move faster, but you already have to kind of know how to draw before using them. But if it's just a hobby, yeah, it's a fun tool to have. You can literally paint without the dirtiness of painting. Animal Saturn 15. Any tips on how to draw two people fighting? Oh, yeah, that's I mean, I don't know if I have any particular tips, but in a lot of ways, if you are drawing two people fighting, you're a choreographer. You got to figure out camera angles and what the person is doing, and show what to show, what not to show. I personally take a lot of cues from 90s Hong Kong action movies. They had, in my opinion, the best, and try to imagine what the sequence of events go, how the sequence of events go in a fight scene, and there's no real trick to it. It's study, and I know I keep on pushing this, but it's true. The only way to get better at something is study what you're trying to learn. And if it's action scenes, find your favorite action movies and kind of go through it, break it down. You have most everyone have computers, especially everyone watching right now has a computer. You can pause and slow down, and everything that is at your fingertips now so easily, where it wasn't before. I used to have to take my VCR or my DVD player and pause it and slow it down, and then on TV just copy out the scene that I'm thinking of, and I do that a lot. I used to do that a lot. Take movies that I loved and just break down scenes to see how the person that directed it and produced it handled this angle or this fight scene and stuff, and just copied them, right? Like, when you're learning, copying is fine. You can't take it. Copying to learn is fine because you're not taking it as your own. You're using it as a learning tool. Just make sure that that it's not yours as a, you didn't create it. But yeah, you learning through other people, that's important. Claire MCD1, how do you choose between background versus no background, especially in panels where you don't necessarily need it, emotional scenes? Again, it's planning ahead of time. Sometimes if you look at a page when you get the script, you break it down into scenes that that, okay, this I have to show, say, a building, or there's elements in the background that will show up later, so I need to make sure that the audience sees those elements. And then other times when the panel doesn't have that. So when you see sometimes and this is where layouts come in handy, where you break down the page and you place the elements that are, or you plan to place elements that are needed to push the story forward. You can cherry pick certain parts where you're like, well, this part I've already shown, say, this rose on the table. I don't need to show it again, so I don't need to show that table. So I can just have these people just speak close up, so I don't have to put backgrounds. Or if the writer puts heavy word balloons, you could generally utilize that moment to not put as many backgrounds. But it's a balance, right? Because sometimes you get to a point where you're like, okay, there's just too much going on, and the audience doesn't need to see the whole all of this, so you'll take a few panels where you just don't need backgrounds. That being said, I'm as well as other people have been just as guilty, that sometimes when I'm just on deadline and you just have no choice but to not put as much because you just can't finish it. So that has that comes into play from time to time, and hopefully that's way less than normal. But I don't want to be preachy and say like all these times and then get called out because certain times I didn't do it either. So I mean, I've been working in comics since 2003, I want to say. That's a long time, almost 20 years. So we are. There's a lot of times where I cheated and did something, or didn't put some backgrounds in because of running on a deadline and things like that. But generally, the key is cherry picking scenes to make sure that the story flows properly, and making sure that the audience is not cheated from the experience when you don't have backgrounds. Though one interesting, fun little, well, it's not necessarily fun. It depends on who you ask. But one trick you can do to minimize some drawing of the backgrounds is that you can utilize one landmark, you can say, and it could be anything. It could either be like a statue or a specific tree or a coffee mug on a table, and you can utilize something like that the audience knows that element exists in the background, and sometimes you can just have those elements specifically stand out in your panel to remind the character or the audience where they are with that landmark, and then go minimal on other things to kind of fudge it. Like that's something that I've used and sometimes used from time to time, depending on what it calls for. And on YouTube, I really like seeing how much you change the orientation of the picture. It's something I never really thought of doing with my digital art. It's really only to get the line that I'm looking for. I mean, you change the orientation a lot of times as an inker and as a penciler because your body is not moving, right? So and your arm can only move a certain direction. So when you change orientation, it's just so that you get the right line weight and, bounciness or style or whatever you're trying to go for, because it's, again, like you said, like your body's not really moving, and your arm can only move a certain direction, so you kind of utilize the those kind of things to help push that, especially digital art, since you're not moving the page at all, right? And you can't move the tablet like you do a piece of paper. So I think that's also why I always had trouble color painting in real life, because if you have a large canvas, let's say, you can't move it like you do here. You have to paint a certain way. Also, I zoom in and out all the time just to kind of remind me of certain things, just to show whether or not, again, like I'm placing a lot of black shapes. I have to balance it out with larger, higher contrast shapes of white, so you can, it's not just a muddy mess, right? It's about balancing your picture, your drawing, so that it has the right amount of shapes of either black or white. If you're just using ink, you know you could do this with color as well, because you have to balance your colors and your lighting with shapes as well. But yeah, as you can tell with this stream, all I end up talking about is shapes, and if you block out shapes, it helps the mind see more of what you're trying to do. So because the simpler the drawing, if it still comes across, you can add as much or as little detail as you want, and it's still impactful. YouTube picks fit any tips for drawing elements like fire, water, etc. Again, best tip is try to study from real life, both understand what it's doing and also how it looks in real life. Something like fire is interesting because fire generally has to have a point of specific point where it stems from. So you have to remember that fire's not just like wild and crazy. It always has a point in which the light comes from. So it's usually central, and a lot of times fire, you have to, you know, the flames stick to whatever it's burning. So you have to kind of look at real life things and try to kind of point out those parts where you can break it down like that. Water's a little bit different. It has no real central point, but it interacts with its surroundings a lot. And I think what a lot of people see is, you know, when, say, waves crash on a beach or against a rock, you have to imagine where the point of the water is coming in and hitting the element and then bouncing off, and then how it would react accordingly, because water is both, you know, kind of solid looking, but also, you know, but breaks down into little other bits, and that's where the detail comes from with water. Also, but if you're drawing still water, is a different thing too. So, you know, if you can break down the way you see it and the way it changes and moves. I mean, I studied through Mike Turner for years with a lot of his books, and they were a lot of them revolving around those elements like fire and water and stuff like that. So it took me a long time. Mike Turner had a really good technique of layering water how you see it, and giving books and reading books about how water crashes onto land and stuff like that, and it's a lot of studying. So yeah, just pick up some books on water and waves and try to study how they actually react, and that might help you. That'll probably help you understand it a little bit more and understand how to draw it. Alright, I think I'm almost done this apocalypse. At least the full figure one. I'll show you how I do rocks. Now this is the fun part about understanding your shapes and stuff, because you can really play with these elements without really doing drawing. Because I mean, sometimes you can draw without drawing. Now I'll do this on another layer, and I'll mask him out a little bit. Yeah. Now these rocks I'll try to do in the next 10 minutes. So I mask him out so that when I draw on this layer with the mask on, it won't go through him. That's what a mask does. So I've already planned out my shapes, so like just take a quick outline to help with, because I already know what my elements want to be to point to him. So I will take, say, this shape here, and you can just make up random shapes. This is, you take the surface of, since it's rocks, you take the surface of it and just imagine it as a plane. Like, as certain parts of it you'll see, certain parts you won't see, but you can imagine the surface of the top part of him, let's say, of the rock. And the same thing with these ones. You just kind of do, say, one part facing. It's almost like a cube, but you kind of just adjust it as you see fit to make it more interesting looking. And okay, so a lot of these shapes will be white is the plan. So this is how I do it, kind of, have, so these parts are black is the plan, but I want some smoke too, so I'll probably plan out this smoke a little bit. Okay, and it doesn't have to be anything crazy, you just put it there for now, it doesn't have to be perfect. And then you start filling in your black shapes, just to, oh, no, that spot wasn't closed. No, it's still not closed. Okay. This is the funny thing about masks. I don't know where the ends close and meet and things like that. Yeah. Okay, that should be okay. No, that one. Okay. So now that you have kind of everything blocked out, this is kind of like my my Bob Ross moment. You just play with the shapes. Sometimes some shapes are too uniform and jagged, so you just kind of like, break it up to give a little texture with your pen, and you can move it around in different ways. And this is where cross-hatching comes into play, right? Like, you use cross-hatching as a gray and to show form. So you don't use cross-hatching for quote-unquote detail, as some people might point out. You use cross-hatching generally to show what you don't want to be black. Now, if this for the purpose of this is just a black and white drawing, so it's or gray if you want to use it, black, white, and gray kind of thing. So you utilize just different shapes and push and pull just to see. Sometimes it's too much white, sometimes it's too much black, and then you just kind of utilize your black and your white, and you go in and out, especially when it's like you said, elements, fire, water, ice, rocks. Again, some things are a little different, like water you can't necessarily, well, not net, you can't, you could, it just depends on how you want to draw water and how you want to draw these elements. There's a general level of style you can utilize in these things, which is fun. And this is the fun thing about watching other artists and seeing how other artists do things, is like you can take elements from people and mix and match with how you draw things too. And I learned a lot of this stuff, I try to look at guys like Eduardo Risso, Frank Miller. They do great shapes with shadow and push and pull of contrast. They're masters at these things, and that's you. Even though I don't draw like any of those guys, you take elements from things that you like from people you see, and see how you can implement them into your own style and in your own work and your own way of drawing. That yeah, you can play around with different looks and different ways to push your drawing to the next level. And it doesn't always have to be drawing everything. So as you can see, I'm just kind of like utilizing some shapes and some detail to show the surface of another point. So you have your main surface, say like here, right, where it's predominantly in the light side, and then you want to utilize the other angles of it to give either a gray or a black, so that it pushes the white to be the framework of it, and that shape helps focus. That shape helps focus your main character, which is pretty hot. Like the thing with this too, you don't want to go overtly detailed with the other elements, because your main character is so dominant, and you don't want to take away from that either. So it's a balance of high contrast with perhaps like lower contrast things. And the fun thing about digital, again, you can utilize the masks to do things like this, where you see that this one leg has a lot of black into it, and to help push depth, you cut in and out through the figure to help pop something out. Because to show depth, a lot of times it's showing elements behind it, but through it. So not just behind it, but from one side all the way through the next side. It's a nice little technique that you can implement in your own drawings that allows the audience to perceive that there's something behind them. So it helps with that, because having flat images is a tendency that a lot of people have, because they draw the character without thinking of the background, and that's that can work sometimes, but other times it's not ideal. So I get to do the 90s foggy technique of they're all standing in smoke, that I don't have to draw that other leg. And this helps a little depth as well. If you can gray out some elements of your drawing from behind, helps kind of push and pull the really high contrast in the front, and then helps gray out the black a little bit in the back. But this is just like fun digital brush tools. You could do this kind of stuff in if you draw on pen and paper as well. You just need to utilize a bit of a mixed media mentality. So when you place the brush, you can either, when you do the brush marks, you can either cut back in with a white gouache paint, which I used to do too. I know my friend Scott Hepburn does that a lot, where you would take, if you have too much contrast, you break it up by taking white paint and drawing over parts that you already drew. So it helps with that. almost got to finish this, so I'm just going to add the last little finishing touches to this, and I'm going to jump on to the bust shot. So this, again, this is a brush on my program that is like a gaze cloud, so it kind of gives you, but if you look close, it's just a bunch of dots. But the program randomizes it, so you kind of utilize it like, you know, you're building smoke. But even when you're building smoke in an element like this, understand that the light source is at the top, right? So you want to, almost like you're drawing just the top of the clouds. So it's not just random. Parts of it are random, but to make it make sense, you kind of, almost like you're drawing tops of clouds, happy clouds. And then you change the brush size to small to big depending on how much light you want to show. So things like that will, it's not, again, like I said, it's not just random. You're doing it with a purpose, and understanding lighting and the light source that you yourself choose is important when you're doing these things. And kind of obscure the line of the smoke that I already drew. So again, this is more about going in and out of it, just to kind of enhance the elements that you've already placed down. Okay, now this back part is a little bit more random, but I'm using it to bump Apocalypse out a little bit more because I felt like he was too in shadow, so he needs a little bit of a imaginary backlighting element to him. And that's sometimes these are the kind of things that you plan out afterwards, right? And this is a good thing about digital, is that I don't have to pre-plan some things. I can just kind of go with it. Yeah, so, and then if I want to play around with a little bit more, I can add some cracks to the front to give it a little bit more texture. And that's the thing I'm trying to work on personally these days for myself, is that I find that my art is a little bit flat from time to time, and I need more texture in some of the elements that I have, and I'm trying to work on how to do that with stuff that isn't like, you know, rocks is easy, and water and stuff like that, smoke, textures from stuff like furniture. It's tough because it's not as simple. So yeah, so this is I think I'm done with this one. I'll put my little signature on here. 2020. All right. Kind of looks like toe, right? All right. Okay, cool. So there is the finished drawing of the full figure. And we'll go real soon to the bust, but I'll answer a couple questions quickly. YouTube, any tips on avoiding posture issues while drawing for extended periods of times? Yes, this is really important for people that draw for extended periods of time, is do back stretches. Just try to remember to stretch out your back every little bit. Like, even in the chair, do stuff like bend over, touch your toes, release that tension quickly, and then you know, like, and there's a lot of resources online. Just look it up. It's important to stay strong. That's the only way you're gonna draw for extended periods of time, is to make sure that your body's strong and it can hold your body up. So just try to do some exercises regularly. Touching my toes while I'm sitting at my desk is one that I do a lot. Advice on drawing ears. I have... well, I mean, it's, again, that just goes back to structure again. Learning how it's formed. So like studying ears is looking at photos, looking the commonalities between them, and all ears are relatively the same, and you can utilize the same pattern. Are you using references to block out these shadows or just previous knowledge? Generally no, but this is where the shapes come into play, because you have to understand larger shapes, they cast larger shadows. So the larger shapes on the body is the chest cavity is larger shape. So understanding that shape and how it interacts with itself, like legs as well, it has like parts of it. And just think of things like a surface. Think of what would show the light and what would hide the light on any object. Every surface that is closest to you and every surface that's furthest away from you. So you got to break it down like that in your brain to make sure that you can see and understand. You can see and understand what would show and what wouldn't show and what would interact with the elements in front and or behind them. So and you know what, like, if you need to take photos to understand that and copy the photos that you take of a scene or a scenario, I think that's important. That's good. I know a lot of people that do that. These are things that 100% people need to do from time to time, and I like even for me, I'm looking at reference from Pepe's X of Swords issues, and because sometimes I forget, and it really depends on how you're doing, and confidence in. Sometimes you'll have confidence that you know exactly how this is going to look and what you want it to do, and other times you don't, and that's okay, and just go with whatever you need at the time. And sometimes you need reference and sometimes you don't. So welcome again to Marvel Live Draw. I'm drawing Apocalypse from X of Swords. This time I'm drawing a bust shot version of him. I'm working on Clip Studio Pro. It's my jam. This program is my favorite thing. Alright, Twitch, Superfan27, do you ever decide to do less hatching in lieu of shading in the coloring phase? Yeah, sometimes. It depends on the look that I'm going for. I know that there's a certain look in the X office these days, or not these days, I mean a lot of times. The look has been very popular in general, but sometimes I'll do less cross hatching if I'm in direct contact with the colorist, which sometimes that happens, and I want very specific things. And sometimes I will, in lieu of cross hatching, and especially with digital, I would do a layer of grayscale where I kind of indicate what I'm thinking of for the lighting, but that's relatively recent. I like to try to allow the colorists to do what they do best, because Marvel has some of the best colorists in the industry. You gotta let them do their thing. But sometimes certain story beats require some elements that you have to make sure that they know. And communication with the colorist is vitally important when it comes to those kind of things. Claire MCD1, how much are you willing to sacrifice anatomy accuracy to increase impact of the pose? I personally don't think you need to necessarily sacrifice anatomy stuff, but one thing specifically to maybe not one thing specifically, but I find that's a tricky one because every person and every artist is a different interpretation of what the body could look like or what they want them to look like as, a dynamic pose as opposed to accurate. And yeah, that's a tough one. I go with my gut. Generally, I think that I'm pretty accurate on my poses, and a lot of times when I've gotten called out for certain things that maybe aren't what someone might imagine as accurate, I do have references for those moments a lot of times, from movies that, because again, like I told you, I love Hong Kong action movies from the 90s, and a lot of that stuff had amazing acrobats doing phenomenal things in real life. Pre-CG, these people would do these amazing feats with their body, and there is room for that in real life that perhaps a regular person couldn't do. And that's fine, but that's a conversation I like having. I like talking about it and my reasonings why. I never want to make it seem like I'm doing something that is out of the realm of reality, let's just say, to a certain degree. But even sometimes people have a tendency to over exaggerate their anatomy, and that's okay too. Sometimes it works. Do I have any advice to draw arms? I mean, I know I'm kind of, I keep on going at this like people or need to study all the time, and in a lot of ways you do. There are basic shapes of a human body and of other things in the world that you can reuse and utilize to speed up that process a little bit. But again, breaking down the arm, breaking down the subject that you are trying to recreate is important. So the arm has, the shoulders, the bicep tricep area, and then the forearm, and those three things generally are the main three things that you would see as a person, like as a viewer of the art piece. And kind of understanding those elements and then knowing how to draw them together is important, and how it reacts. Like an arm bends and flexes, and when that happens, either the bicep straightens out or the bicep flares out, and same thing with the tricep, so but on the opposite end. So the best thing to do is to learn how those things look. For anatomy, I find workout anatomy books really helpful, because the whole point in exercising those muscles is to isolate, and then so those books will show isolated sections of those muscles that you can draw and learn. Strength training anatomy books, yeah, like one of the main ones that I actually got from this I don't know if any of you have gone to this thing called Body Works, and it was a thing at the museum where they showed you the human body, not always human, but sometimes animals, but without the skin, and they show them in motion, and I, you study that at the museum, and or at the science center, sorry, and then there was a book that they had for sale there called, I think it was something like Strength Training Anatomy, and that helped a lot, because sometimes when you get anatomy books from artists, it's still stylized anatomy, and that's not really super helpful. Sometimes people need to know like legit kind of medical anatomy type of books to help understand what it really looks like, and then you can adjust it to your artistic needs from that point, which is why it's again important to draw from life, because that's where you can take your base and then adjust it to your style. Okay, 15 minutes to finish this, so let's see if I can. Oh, I know I can. The beauty of drawing for comics for as many years as I have been drawing is that I can generally know when to go with my gut, and again, this comes from a lot of practice, and the reason why I'm capable of doing this kind of stuff with, say, no reference is that I've done it a lot of times. That being said, when I draw my monthly books, there are a lot of times where I'm scrounging for anatomy just to make sure that this pose or this object that I'm drawing has the proper look, the proper way of doing things. Like, I'm drawing right now an issue of Excalibur post X of Swords, where I have to draw a room in Buckingham Palace, and I don't know what a room in Buckingham Palace looks like. The molding in one of the rooms, and the style of chairs, and those are things that you gotta reference, you gotta look up, and while it can be quite daunting to see it and understand it, that's the key of learning all the time, right? Yeah, I reference a ton of things, just sometimes I'm like, okay, I need to learn to draw a different chair than I normally draw a chair, and then that comes into play a lot. Random everyday items that sometimes you get a little lazy, everything looks the same, so you look for a different office chair or a different table or different, and that's where you can advance your skills and make sure that the audience sees this as a place that they can actually step into in real life. Also, when I the funny thing about these kind of drawings too is it kind of reminds me of, so at conventions, and as we don't have a chance to go to many of those right now for obvious reasons, is that there's sometimes a lot of these sketch battles, and then you have to get used to drawing under the gun as well, because there's a limited time per each panel, and people like to watch you come up with things live, and it's quite a popular thing, and I've done a few in my time that and against amazing artists that just do things on the fly. Like, my god, like Ken Lashley is one of the guys that does things so fast, and he has these techniques that really allow for a very dynamic drawing with a lot of flow and action. So, and you can utilize cross hatching for those things too, because there's it's like speed lines in an anime, right? Like there's aspects to using kind of just, I mean, sometimes I call it nonsense because it kind of is. You can just use a lot of the texture to kind of push to give a little bit more life to your drawing, but again, to me that's like icing. You throw an icing on a cake, but it's not the cake, right? So and if you have both, even better. If you have both of those things, it really pushes your art to the next level. And again, with the arm, say for example like this, this isn't showing most of it, but I already kind of know. So this top part is the bottom of the shoulder, which would cast a heavy shadow because that's the largest part of your arm, probably, especially with Apocalypse. And then you have your forearm connect here. This muscle here is kind of like an overlay over top of the middle of between the tricep and the bicep. And you can use those shapes to really push the depth of the depth of it. Like you can grab at it. So that's kind of understanding your anatomy, but also knowing how they interact with light and shadow, and then you can just shape it out instead. Instead of actually drawing it. And that helps speed you up as well. See if this works. Does this work? Okay, so again, understanding where the shape of the shoulder will react to light. So if there's a light source at the top, you have your main, you have your main light source touching there, and then the form around it, and then the secondary light would be here. So you don't need to show as much, and it's just like a sphere, like that's why when you go to art classes they tell you to color and paint and render spheres and cylinders, because generally most of the basic shapes are those things, and then you utilize that and bring it into a more complicated form like the arm, and it's a mix of cylinders and spheres. And remember, your shading, your cross hatching generally should be complementary to your larger dark shapes. As a general rule, not like a firm and hard one, because you can utilize cross hatching in different ways to denote texture and things. But try to remember that cross hatching is used to show shape. So go around the form and not just straight, and but also gray, like, so there's a this is like a transition color from light to dark. And again, you can do this, you don't have to do this digitally. If you make sure that you have some white gouache with your black ink from time to time to have those elements go in and out of lights. And you can always, some of my friends, they ink and they don't like it, they white out over it and then start again. And sometimes you just need to do that. And so don't be afraid to not have it perfect the first time. Just know that you can always do another one, or fix it with whiteout even. Fly Mighty Bee, are there any custom brushes you find yourself using often? Actually, I use almost no custom brushes. My main thing is always just the regular G pen or whatever they have as which is kind of funny because I know like a lot of people like using stuff, and in fact I'm pretty certain Pepe and RB use a lot of the same programs and stuff as I do. And I feel like the way they render, like Dan Mora, I think uses it as well. I think that they use a lot of, not a lot, but I think they have a few brushes that I've seen, or at least I think I notice that I'm not 100% sure which ones they are. But again, like I said, it really just depends on kind of what you're looking to do. So if you want it to look a little bit more rough, and I know my style is a little cleaner, sometimes a little manga-esque-ish, and I like it like that. And but I wouldn't mind also kind of learning, trying to find some brushes to give it a little bit more texture and elements that can give depth using texture. So I might start looking for some things that might help that. Emerald Miner 0070, Marcus, how long have you been drawing and an artist? I've been drawing most of my life. When I was a kid, my parents didn't really have a lot of money to send me to do sports, which is what I really wanted to do, and they needed me to sit still. My parents used to own a restaurant in a small town in Canada, and we had nothing to do but sit there, and my parents, or my mom specifically, taught me to draw, so then I can sit still and not cause trouble, which I always ended up doing. Yeah, so that part of drawing I've been doing my entire life. Comics wise, I started drawing in 2000. I started professionally in 2003, and I basically been drawing ever since. I've been very, very fortunate to have the ability to be in comics for as long as I have been. I know it's not easy for people to break in, and even harder for people to stay in. But I love it. It's honestly, I can't imagine myself doing anything else. So this is my version of Apocalypse at a poetry jam night. Actually, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna use a different gradient. Is it this one? Yeah. You could do like small things with gradients and speckle. Alright, let's see. Tone scraping, colors running spray, maybe. Some random things. Give a little texture to the background. Alright. Nah, I mean, if I had a little bit more time, I probably would try to give him a little bit more texture. You know, like there's aspects of him that lean very well to you know, texturizing certain aspects of his costume. Again, when you crosshatch or do what you would consider texture and detail for things, just know what those kind of things are trying to mimic. So you're trying to mimic, say, so for his collar part, maybe something like steel, but I mean, obviously it's not steel, but you never really know. But you can give that illusion of texture, and you do differently for his shoulder thingies as well. Like these shoulder things, probably some kind of fabric or leather, but it's gold, so you don't want to put too much texture into it that make it look like black leather. But you can give a little texture that these little stripy thingies, or kind of denote maybe like a little bit of fold in a thicker thing, and stuff like that. But other than that, this is basically it. I think we're at a point where we are finished. So we have this one, which is the bust of Apocalypse in a Backstreet Boys concert, maybe. the light makes it look like he's on a stage or something like that, but that's okay. Yeah, Apocalypse is quite the diva, so it's all right. It fits with his character. So we have bust of Apocalypse, and then we have full figure Apocalypse. How about that? So so everybody, thank you for watching.
What kind of music do you play at a party and everybody's there to see you off? What kind of music do you play at a party